Hi everyone, this is Lorraine Driscoll, and today I want to talk about retained primitive reflexes and a study that was done recently by Dr. Melillo on a huge group of children. This is over 2,000 children that the study was conducted on, and 2,000 different children from various states and areas in the US. So it was a really, really nice demographic, and something, I'm just going to pop this up, something that Dr. Melillo addressed also was that a lot of the studies that have been done are on typically boys with ADHD, boys with learning difficulties, and so forth. And so he made sure to have a really good combination, since these issues present differently in both boys and girls. So it's exciting in terms of what the study found, because in terms of what I do, in terms of what I'm really passionate about and what this promises, and that is that interventions can, non-drug related interventions, as well as not just relying on compensations, can really help to overcome a lot of the difficulties that our children are struggling with. So it essentially takes out the mystery out of why does my child have a learning or behavior difficulty. And for sure, it's just, it is a piece of the puzzle. It's not the only factor, but it's definitely a huge factor. So if you've been doing the traditional method for a while, whether it's tutoring or whatever the case may be, that can get really discouraging if you're not seeing any results, which a lot of my clients see, or just not a snail's pace results, right? And a lot of compensations where kids are still really struggling with self-esteem. So what this study found was that every single child in the study group, over 2,000 children who had learning, behavior, sensory motor issues, and so forth, every single one of them had retained primitive reflexes. So that is, to be honest, that is not surprising for me, and I'm not trying to sound conceited. The research, this isn't the first study like this that has been done, and every single child I work with has retained primitive reflexes, so I wasn't surprised. But it's exciting because it was done on such a large body of children, and to find these results. So what does this all mean? Well, first of all, I just want to say we have a real obsession in education, and even health for that matter, with testing. Whether it's reading, let's test the kids and find out their reading levels and place them and so forth. But and to the point where I'm going to totally admit, it kind of drives me bananas, because there's a whole obsession with testing and finding the answer, finding what the problem is, but we're looking at the problem from a surface level perspective and not the root cause. And what I love about this is it goes much deeper than that. It's looking at the retained primitive reflexes, which are the underlying reason why there is auditory processing issues, why there is often visual processing issues, why there is executive functioning breakdown. And after nutrition, retained primitive reflexes and brain disorganization is one of the most overlooked factors that I see for kids having learning, reading, behavioral difficulties, sensory processing, all of that type of stuff. And I even want to say more than nutrition. And I'm not saying that nutrition has a huge impact as well, and I don't even want to consider debating if one has a bigger impact than another, because they both have a huge impact on different children. But what I mean by that is that a lot of us are aware, nutrition plays a role. I think we're queuing in big time with autism and ADHD, not so much as learning, which it does with that as well. But when it comes to retained primitive reflexes, a lot of people are still like, what is a retained primitive reflex, which I'm going to talk about today. So what is amazing about the study is it's not just, oh, great, we found that they had retained primitive reflexes. They have brain disorganization. Tell me something I don't know. That means they have a different brain structure. Well, after 12 weeks, they were able, with different sensory motor exercises, the automatic metronome, and different interventions that were non-drug approaches, what resulted is the reflexes mostly integrated, and also that the children made really significant improvements with focus, learning, all of that type of stuff. So the secret to your child improving is not just, studying, reading and so forth, and definitely do that. But if that foundational piece, if the sensory motor system is not developed, that is the base of the brain being able to do all of those other facets such as executive functioning and so forth. If that is not developed, then everything else is going to feel like an uphill battle. So let's talk about what are retained primitive reflexes, because a lot of clients will tell me they don't know what that is, they've never heard of that, or they don't really understand it that well. Maybe they have heard of it from an OT or something. So primitive reflexes develop in the brainstem before birth. Okay, they develop in utero. They are not taught. They require no thought. They are instinctual. And they are essentially nerve connections that are connected to the nervous system, and they're like an involuntary response to a stimuli. So a really sweet example that I think melts all of our hearts when we've had babies is, if you remember, whenever you place your finger in the palm of their hand and they wrap their tiny fingers around your finger, and it's just like so heart melting, right? So they do it every time you do that. And that's because that is actually a primitive reflex. And if that reflex retains, that'll actually cause issues, or it stays retained, that'll actually cause issues with dysgraphia and so forth. So there's many primitive reflexes. Some of them are heart melting, like the rooting reflex, where they, you know, their grandpa's holding them and they're trying to look for grandpa's nipple, right? So again, that's a primitive reflex. And if that retains, that can cause speech issues. So there's a lot of primitive reflexes, and it's not just if this is retained, it'll cause this problem. Some of them will cause a whole gamut of problems if they are retained. And so they have two purposes. Purpose number one is for survival, because the central nervous system is immature. So for example, them taking their first breath when they come out of the womb, that's part of a primitive reflex. And also the second thing that it does is basically assisting with those early movements. And those early movements are crucial because that is basically what helps to grow and develop the brain so that it can do more complex things. So what happens is, if it doesn't integrate, if those reflexes are there for about 6 months to 2 years to 3 years, depending on the reflex, however, that reflex needs to integrate. If it does not integrate, what will happen is it will result in your child having a very hard time accessing their higher brain levels, where there's reasoning, planning, impulse control, emotional regulation, all of those higher order thinking skills that are involved with executive functioning and so much more. And so again, basically, if you don't have those lower brain levels developed and those primitive reflexes are not integrated, you're going to have a really shaky foundation, and that's where learning and behavior issues are going to happen. And so they may not integrate. Why? Does anyone know, if you're watching, whether the live or the replay, do you know what can cause these primitive reflexes to not integrate into the nervous system? So number one reason that we're seeing most commonly, and why one of the reasons that's understood why there's such a rise in these difficulties with children, is that they are not getting enough tummy time. And no mama guilt allowed. Mine totally didn't get enough tummy time, and it wasn't because she was neglected. It's because I was holding her all the time because she was so fussy. And that's a whole other issue I could go into another day. So insufficient tummy time, as well as trauma. So it could be psychological trauma, or it could be something like a head trauma. Environmental toxicity, which is huge, right, with our kids. And it could be environmental toxicity like pesticides, heavy metals, all of that type of stuff. Or it could be like really bad gut health, if you will. So gut dysbiosis, or serious illness. So a prolonged serious illness can cause certain reflexes to remain retained. So if they again if those reflexes do not integrate, to kind of put it in perspective in terms of what that feels like, think of it as an instrument that holds its tune too long and kind of drowns out the rest of the band. So the rest of the band, you can't really hear or, enjoy the experience, because you have this one instrument that's just blocking kind of, or drowning everything else out. The other example or comparison that I give it to is, you go on certain websites and there's a pop-up and you're trying to get to the website, but you can't get to the website because a stupid pop-up won't go away. And sometimes you have to look around and look for the pop-up, or you have to put your email in, or you can't access it. And sometimes it's more complicated. And sometimes you end up getting to the website. And other times, if you're like me, you're just like, okay, you know what? It wasn't that important. Forget it. I'll go to another website. So that is what's happening. Your child is trying to access their cortex, but depending the severity of the reflex retention or how many reflexes they have retained, they're going to have a really hard time accessing their cortex, right? Basically, it prevents easy access. It doesn't mean they're not accessing their cortex at all. It prevents easy access to their cortex. So what Dr. Melillo's study confirmed is, number one, that within the study group of over 2,000 children, all of the children had retained primitive reflexes. And these were children who had, learning behavior issues, all that type of stuff. And then number two was that the more reflexes that were retained, the more severe the learning and behavior issues. And that should come as no surprise. It's the same with the more toxic a child is, or the more, gut dysbiosis there is, the more serious the learning behavior or mental health issue is going to be. So after the 12-week program that Dr. Melillo and his group had the children do, this is where it gets really positive, is they did 12 weeks of sensory motor integration, automatic metronome, all of that type of stuff. And these kids not only had their reflexes integrated, as a result of the reflexes integrating, their behavior, learning, and so forth, sensory motor, regulation or coordination significantly improved, or they completely overcame certain issues depending on the child and so forth. And I just want to say to that, that's just 12 weeks. Anything I've read on primitive reflex integration, 12 weeks is great. You'll start seeing results, but it's usually not enough. And so if they made improvements in just 12 weeks, imagine the improvements they can make if they continue doing these exercises and so forth to create new pathways in the brain, to integrate these reflexes, to develop these underdeveloped areas in the brain. Imagine how much better it could be. When I work with clients and we do the 6-month program, and I even have clients who continue and do 8 and 9 months, they can't believe the differences when they do these exercises, simple exercises, 5 days a week. So, like I said, it's not the first study to correlate primitive reflexes with learning and behavior difficulties. This has been studied for a while, but just really exciting because it was such a large body. It was the largest body of children that were studied with regards to this. So that's why it's really incredible. And basically, to me, what this study basically shows is what we've known for a while, that this is not a mystery. There are clear structural differences, yes, among children with ADHD, dyslexia, all that type of stuff, but it does not mean that that's the end of the story. The body and brain has an incredible ability to be, it is extremely resilient. It wants to heal. It just needs to be stimulated, nourished, or, given the correct therapies in order to do that. And what this really shows for me is that the promise of neuroplasticity, and how we really in traditional education are failing our students by not, reaching for corrective therapies, which are done in private schools on a regular basis. Children are screened for retained primitive reflexes as soon as they enter school. In a lot of private schools, that is not being done in the public schools and in most school systems. And I totally get why. It's manpower and all of that type of stuff. But basically, we have a lot of catching up to do. This research is not new. So basically, if you want to schedule a free clarity call, if you're interested in my program, please do that via my website. And also don't forget to grab the Laser Focus Learner, my free starter kit. I will put the link for that in the comments below. So thanks for watching, everyone. And let me know, does your child have retained primitive reflexes? Does any of this sound familiar? Have you heard about this before? And what has it been your experiences with understanding the root cause of your child's learning and behavioral struggles? Thanks for watching.